welcome back. If you've been to my channel before, if you haven't, welcome. I talk about this visionary ventures, meaning I explore aspects, theories about how to understand yourself and theories about how to understand the universe around you, because even as a society, we all come out, we all exist not being sure of how things work. And science is always developing. It's an ongoing evolution, hopefully not de-evolution. Anyway, I'm really excited to, I hope my face conveys it, but I put my notes aside for a moment. I'm really excited to share with you these early workings out of two theories of mine that not of mine, but I mean two theories I've been studying. There's internal family systems and there's also Dramatica. And I've explained about Dramatica quite a bit in my earlier videos. I mean, almost to the point of, I hope not ad nauseum. I hope that's not the case. I haven't talked that much about internal family systems. Okay, what I'm trying to do is do something that, please don't take these words the wrong way. What's his name? The one who developed R.L. Klein or R.L. Stein or the one who developed Scientology. I'll be really biased in this video in some sense. I'm just being real and I'm being open, and I'm not in danger of being demonetized or whatever for what I say. So I'll just be real, be honest, and be open. I think L. Ron Hubbard, that's it. L. Ron Hubbard, from what my take on L. Ron Hubbard is that he, from watching videos like, I can't remember his name. He used to have a mustache and a little bit of a, now it's shaven off, but he had been in Scientology for a while, and he left, and he does a lot of videos on YouTube about cults and cult behavior, and Sensibly Speaking podcast. Look that up, and that's who I'm talking about. Anyway, my take on from what he's looked into, and I guess from other people who looked into it, L. Ron Hubbard had been trying to understand himself, and there's also an aspect of him where he was trying to develop sort of like a cult group. Even at the time, he was trying to develop this group, and it became, I'll be honest, it became a cult pretty quickly. He started off with Dianetics, like understanding the mind, and then it became Scientology and a religion and so forth, a hierarchical MLM, really. So I don't want to go down that route, but I'm also trying to understand how the mind works as an actual science. It's a shame because I remember growing up in probably the mid-'80s, there were commercials on TV for Dianetics, this book. I think the book was actually called Dianetics, The Science of the Mind. And I like that concept, but Scientology itself is clearly, from what I've seen, a cult. I'll say it. So anyway, I want to develop my own model. I want to integrate these two different theories into an overall model. And why did I pick these two theories, the internal family systems and Dramatica? Well, Dramatica, it's very easy. It was developed by two filmmakers during college, who had known each other in college, and they worked on a film, and then they went off to experience life, and then they reunited in order to figure out how to write films better, create films better. And in that time, they had a lot of life experience, and one of them had a sex change with hormones, a complete works. And so it was a wonderful meeting of the mind. So anyway, they developed this theoretical model of how the mind changes and configures itself, how like a Rubik's cube, this model, periodic table model, changes and shifts. The pieces shift around depending on the film or the for film. I guess you'd mean the experience one goes through while watching the film, the film itself. Um, and they developed this. They developed a software that went along with it. That's able to. It's been doing this since 1993 or whenever. Actually, they released it in '91, but give or take a few years. They've been testing it against films um, for since then for about 30 years. Each month they've been doing this, and it's held up pretty well. So my eyes focus on what results work. What are predictive results? I mean, what are theories that have predictive, concrete, accurate results? So that's a good aspect of the mind that I would want to see how it integrates in with my overall understanding of the mind, my overall model of the mind. Then there's internal family systems, which instinctively seems to make sense. It was proposed. Its developer was Dr. Richard Schwartz, and he was a family systems therapist. He would work with family. He would work with a family and the members of that family and study the dynamics. Interesting in and of itself, the dynamics that go on between members of the family, and when there's a gap, for example, in a role, it's like there are specific roles and like little circles representing a role in this whole community called the family, and how a member can just slide into a role if the role is a void, like slide into certain void roles and embody them. It's like they have to fit all the pieces. It's like the whole family is trying to like subconsciously perhaps like fit its members each into individual roles within this family organization. So one thing that really persuaded me that he's onto something is that, well, anyway, no, before I get into that, let me finish the rest of the explanation. So when he was looking at people, he was interviewing or treating people in general. He was talking with people in general. He would notice that sometimes a person would say, well, part of me thinks this way and a different part of me thinks that way. And he noticed that some aspects of a person's mind, the person would say, oh, I'm feeling very creative. And he would ask, well, what part is that? Well, it's not one of these kinds of parts, a part that may hold on to a trauma, or a part he nicknamed the manager, which manages the daily activity. It's not an exiled part with a trauma. It's not a firefighter part that's trying to put out a fire of a trauma that another part has. It's not the manager part that is trying to organize these various parts. It seems to be a true self. So he nicknamed that the self. There are 8 C's, and they are, I wrote these notes, they are compassion, curiosity, clarity, creativity, confidence, courage, connectedness, and calm. When you're experiencing those, you feel like you're in your true self. And it's not necessarily one of these extra parts that may have trauma. And meanwhile, I've been thinking since last week about the Force. What got me down this road was that I've known this person earlier in my life, and I think that this person has been through a lot, clearly, and could have benefited from what encouraged me, and what I can't even find the right words, but what let out the uh, good, strong, identity-centric parts of myself when I was really young. I was born in the end of '75, so when Return of the Jedi, I'd seen movies on TV. I think Superman, and certainly The Sound of Music and Mary Poppins and The Muppets, and then maybe even The Muppet Show or The Muppet Movie. And then the earliest movie I can recall seeing in a movie theater was with my mom, of course, and it was Return of the Jedi. And I had not consciously seen Star Wars, the first Star Wars movie in 1977, nor Empire Strikes Back. But I latched on to Return of the Jedi, and I believe that I had natural instincts, like creativity. I was already drawing, and I enjoyed stories, and I enjoyed watching television, and I think part of my mind was already open to understanding stories and characters interacting in films and TV shows as relating to me, and I can relate to situations they've had, not necessarily the more fanciful stuff, but the underlying fanciful stuff. There were morals, and there were not morals, it sounds preachy, but there were themes, and they were allegories. I think I could even tell at the time that they were allegories. And so when I saw Return of the Jedi, I could notice the allegory even at a young age. I would have been about 7 and a few months. I would have been 7 and a few months when I saw Return of the Jedi. And the Force, and I wasn't. Well, actually, there are some shots, some photographs of me holding a stick like a lightsaber. I don't think you can go through Star Wars without enjoying at least once, lightsabering. But what struck me the most was Luke Skywalker confronting Darth Vader, his father, and that was even in the commercial trailer for the movie. I remember Ben Kenobi saying, "You must confront Darth Vader again." And in the movie itself, in that same scene, he says, "I can't kill my own father." Notice Obi-Wan says, "You must confront," and Yoda too, "You must confront Darth Vader." Doesn't say kill, must confront. And at one point, Yoda says, "You must confront Darth Vader. Only then a Jedi will you be." And I interpret that as you must resolve those lingering conflicts within yourself before you can be clear-minded and have a quiet mind and clear vision, so forth, and not have a distorted mind in order to become a Jedi Knight. I haven't read any of the Star Wars legends or Star Wars fan fiction or whatever, but this is my take on it. It seems pretty clear from just watching the movie itself and my own sense of how the real world works. And that's what I'm trying to do. I had wanted to... Okay, so these aspects, the drawing, the creativity, so forth, Return of the Jedi, and a few years later, about a year later, Transformers, watching Transformers, and there are interesting aspects of that helped me to grow. It's not that they took me on a different path, it's that they emphasized and strengthened and maybe empowered, I guess maybe that's a good word, empowered those instincts within me. And then a couple years, 1987, I mark as probably the beginning, like spring 1987, I think is when I really became interested in Star Trek. So that took over quite a bit. Star Wars went to the wayside. But I'm passionate about all three, Transformers, Star Wars, and Star Trek. And they empowered those things within me, innately within me. So, I feel dismay. I feel like this other person that I've known has been hurting, and I started off wanting to do a video here about themes in Star Trek, common themes in Star Trek, because I was very passionate about Star Trek, and Star Trek excites me. And it was the only show that not just that I watched with my mom, but it's the only, like, especially with my mom, I would act like I was watching a football game. Star Trek is very exciting, visually very exciting, mentally, intellectually, in terms of the imagination, very exciting. It deals with human drama. It deals with, as opposed to Vulcan drama, Klingon drama. No, it deals with human drama, and it frees you up. It to think in different ways. It opens up your imagination. And sadly, I don't think many people that I know are just give Star Trek a chance, or they for whatever reason they just don't give it a chance. So I have this mindset that was strengthened by Return of the Jedi and Star Wars and other the Muppet movie and so forth. And I think this other person didn't have that. I think could have benefited a lot from it. So I started thinking of doing a video about not necessarily themes in certain episodes of Star Trek, but perhaps collectively the original series of Star Trek. What are the common themes? And then I went into work the next morning, and I thought, I really energized by this, the Force in Star Wars and in Return of the Jedi, because I've been watching YouTube movie reactions, people's first reactions as they're watching the various movies, Star Wars included, especially the original series, the original trilogy. So that got me thinking of the Force. And to me, the Force was never really about levitating objects, although, telekinetically crushing somebody's throat is a pretty interesting idea to contemplate. It was never about lightsabering. It was never about these external aspects of the Force. That's why the Star Wars movie Rogue One was... Oh, good. It's still recording. Good. Okay. I won't gesture as much. Okay. So I have to tie my hands down. So the Force. So when in Rogue One, they had a character that said things like, "I'm one with the Force is with me, I fear no danger," and stuff like that. And I identified very much with that. That felt to me like a true expression of the Star Wars, the Force, or the Force in Star Wars. I'm glad they got back to that rather than the lightsabering and flipping over each other and incredible stunt work. To me, that's the Force. In Yoda, it's in Empire Strikes Back, Yoda talks about patience. He notices Luke Skywalker is impatient. Even in A New Hope, Ben Kenobi notices he's impatient. He keeps testing himself instead of trusting himself. There's the phrase, trust the Force, trust yourself, use the Force, Luke, reach out with your feelings. You can do that to too much of an extent. But anyway, and Yoda says, essentially, so don't look at me. You think I'm short and small and therefore weak. Well, look what I can do. And then he uses the Force masterfully, literally, because he's a Jedi master. And these other things. And what really struck me when I first, at age 7.5 or whatever, was Luke confronting his father. The stuff about Jabba had to be cleared up because they left Empire Strikes Back with a cliffhanger. The other stuff is interesting, but the thrust that I see in Return of the Jedi, I think maybe for several other people, is Luke confronting his father and contending with the Emperor. And he's convinced. There's a wonderful scene about halfway through the movie, where Luke confronts his father. They're walking. I I think they're on Endor. Anyway, he's surrendered himself. This commander gives his lightsaber that he surrendered to Darth Vader, and there's this wonderful talk in terms of father and son where he's saying, "I know the real you, the Anakin part of you is still in there," and Darth Vader says, "That name has no longer any meaning for me," and he says "son" sometimes, indicating that he regards Luke as his son somewhat, and he's still in denial. And he does something at the very end of the movie which he could have done all along, but didn't real. And my take is he didn't realize it, and he finally realizes it, and it's like he's finally dealing with that conflict he's had for all these years, for at least like 2 decades. He finally does it, and he could have done it all along. That's my take. So, so I wanted to do a video about my take on the Force, and I'm still working on that. I also plan to write. I was thinking of my Amazon store and these things I've written about in Kindle, KDP, and I haven't really promoted the stuff I've written and put up available under my real name in Amazon yet. They still sort of seem like drafts. I want to create like this book or this essay at the very least, something like what L. Ron Hubbard did for science, for Dianetics. I don't even want to say Scientology, but like an essay fusing together internal family systems and Dramatica and maybe other aspects. I want to get into neurology. I've studied parts of the brain. I want to understand the physical aspects of the brain which function and generate these mental aspects. I still think that there's a disconnect between psychology and neurology. I want to tie up the loose ends. I want to fuse them together. I don't think we're there at that yet, although we're making strides. So, all right, so with that introduction under the way, the rest is going to be very short. But, okay, so you have internal family systems. You have each mind being composed of a self that has these 8 characteristics, as I said before: calmness, clarity, whatever. And that seems to me very much like the Force. You're confident, like Luke was very confident in Return of the Jedi, surprisingly so, and creativity and compassion. He was compassionate towards his father, and he's doing what IFS calls unblending, I think, if I have that right. When he was talking with his father, his interactions with his father, he was doing therapy on his father in some sense. I think IFS therapy with his father. IFS is different from other approaches to treating psychological treatment, whereas other ones would do thought persuasion or changing someone's mind. IFS doesn't do that. It's unique. Its method of treatment is recognizing, the key word, recognizing these certain parts of the mind that still hold on to trauma. And as I said before in an earlier video, there we go. As I said before in an earlier video, if you ask the part, according to what Richard Schwartz and others have talked about in terms of IFS, if you were to ask the part how old or what time it is currently, the part may say like age 5 or 6, whereas the body and the rest of the mind may be 40-something years old. So the trick is to recognize the part and deal with the part as though the part were what we would think of as a person holding on to trauma and certain experiences, and let the person feel recognized and heard. And that's what psychology, modern psychological treatment does do. It recognizes the importance of being heard and being able to just talk through things. So I think what in Return of the Jedi, Luke Skywalker was trying to get beyond the Darth Vader part of the mind and reach the Anakin Skywalker part, which was still lingering with trauma. And it seems, I guess, Anakin. I'm not even basing any of this on the prequel trilogy, which I've watched, but I think you can get a lot just from the original trilogy. You can understand the backstory just simply from the original trilogy, and not the stuff that was created 15 years later. Luke Skywalker, no, I'm sorry, Darth Vader had clearly been bent and tempted towards the dark side of the Force, and the Emperor had this destructive cult relationship with Anakin Skywalker, and manipulated him. And Darth Vader put aside Anakin put aside that Anakin identity and assumed the role of Darth Vader, but Anakin was still there somewhere, and Luke Skywalker reawakened it. So I want to explain my current thinking process, like my current model of this fusion between Dramatica and internal family systems. Dramatica, as I said before, stay with me. Dramatica has a model like a periodic table. It's 4 levels, has 4 vertical levels of depth and resolution. And when you're watching a movie, what you're actually doing is watching a sequencing. It goes through. I think it starts from the bottom. It's difficult because it ties in the bottom with the top. They're almost all layered. It cycles through and under one element, and then it shifts to another element and cycles through the other elements and to a new element up here, and it cycles through, moves to another one, cycles through, and so forth. So there's a predictable sequencing. The algorithms will generate this predictable sequence of themes, sort of hierarchical. In other words, it works in terms of 4s. 4 units equals 1, or 4 quadrants, 4 units equals 1 unit of the one above. So it's hierarchical. So the top, there are 4. It's like you're outlining, A, B, C, D, and then under each of these letters, there are 4 sub things, and then under the 4 sub thing, each of the 4 sub things, there are 4 sub things. So it's cycling through all of them, but it's doing it rapidly, and that's only one through line. Now there are 4 through lines, 4 perspectives. There's the audience's self experiencing personally the story, and then there's an objective. There's an obstacle or impact character that represents you. It's this other character, and you're comparing yourself to this other character, and this other character went a different path, and you're comparing yourself. It's not necessarily a better path, but just a different path, and you're comparing yourself with this other person. That's 2 through lines. And then the 3rd through line is all the characters involved in this. It's called the objective story. All these characters involved in a larger storyline, and that there's an intellectual arc to that. And then the 4th through line is the relationship and the heart development aspect of that. So those are the 4 through lines, and each of those 4 has this long sequence predictable sequence of theme switches, and there's a lot more to the theory. But here, I want to explain, now these are the early elements. Maybe I should go to this. I want to read off what I had sent to a friend of mine who may or may not be able to understand this. But I'm just going to read what I have for the sake of, because it's easy and I'm still piecing this stuff together. I'm formulating the model of the mind. Although I'm excited, I don't think some of the other people would understand it. Okay, then this is a synthesis of two other theories, Dramatica and internal family systems. And then I explain Dramatica and internal family systems, which I've done here. Here's what I suspect. The characters in the objective story corridor, meaning that through line, the objective story through line that involves all the characters in this larger storyline, are the roles that the parts, according to internal family systems, take on. Let me pause for a moment. At the bottom level, you have 4 quadrants of the bottom level. One of them is terms of obtaining near the top. There are ones that are very recognizable: pursue, prevent, consider, reconsider, and then there's help, hinder, conscience, temptation, and then there are 4 others, or 8 others. But characters, usually characters would embody one of these or 2 of these aspects that I just mentioned. What you think of as the protagonist is actually the pursue character. The pursue character, that's what he pursues. He's pursuing the story goal. And the antagonist is really a function of that element embodying itself in the story. So the characters are merely avatars. What you're really seeing is pursue pursue as a theme being embodied in the story, and then it shifts to help aspect being embodied, and there are interactions between help and pursue. And when you see the pursue character, the protagonist, and a helper character interacting, that's what you're actually seeing. That's a wonderful, beautiful thing about Dramatica. One beautiful thing about Dramatica. You're not seeing, that's the cover. What you're seeing is the surface layer of characters talking with each other in dialogue. But underneath that, underlying that, is really the interaction of these units. And there are even mathematical algorithms that can predict which units are interacting at which time, and the appearance, the sequencing of these units. So I think in our mind, under the internal family systems, I think there's a self, and then there are these parts, and I think the parts, under a certain scenario, like a movie, something, under a certain scenario, each part, like pursue, prevent, avoid, acts as like a internal family member, and they have dynamics with other parts or other family members, or in Dramatica terms, pursue, prevent, avoid, support, oppose, and so forth, controlled, uncontrolled. And their interactions, and I'm wondering, okay, let me get back to this. So I've explained that there are 4 domains, which I explained before: I, you, us, like the relationships that grow in this larger scenario, and then the they, meaning the intellectual, objective, brain-oriented arc of a dispassionate evolution of these characters interacting in this larger situation. There are four different through lines. All right, how do I work in experiences due to more physical aspects of oneself? This is where I get into parts of identities. Like, for example, let me take a moment there. I think of, just think of a woman, for example. A woman, maybe hypothetically, a woman would be interested in sports, and to such an extent that she identifies with being interested in sports and being a sports enthusiast. That's one identity. Another identity is being a woman, like physically, like certain experiences that only a woman has that a man wouldn't have, that distinguishes her. And then she may be black or African, of African descent. That's another identity that she has. It has nothing to do with sports, has nothing to do with being a woman, has to do specifically with being black skinned or descended, African descended. And those are certain experiences that people outside that group that don't identify with that cannot, it biologically cannot have empathy with. So right there, those are three. And then she may have a sibling, and her part of her identity is that she is a sibling of this other person, and they have a relationship, and she identifies herself as being a sibling. She identifies herself as being a woman, a sibling, of black descent, and I can't remember what the other one is. Sports enthusiast. So those are very disparate identities fused together. So I know taking extreme examples just to understand this model better, like test this model against real life. Bigotry rears its ugly head in terms of being a woman and being of black skin, African descent. Now, there are traumas, obviously, that go along with these experiences. Bigotry, somebody being bigoted towards, prejudiced towards you. So that might create a trauma. So in the internal family systems model, that trauma would latch itself onto a part of you, collectively your mind, part of you, and still linger. So I suppose, but then I was thinking of Dramatica. You have pursue, prevent, help, and so forth. Are those parts in this internal family systems aspect? I don't think so, because if you take that hypothetical woman for an example, she pursues sports. That's nice. She also pursues things in black scenario, like African descent scenarios, and the pursue in terms of that could hold a trauma that wouldn't exist in the pursue aspect of sports, or pursue aspect of being a woman, or pursue aspect of being a sibling to someone else. It latched onto it. It has a trauma, may have a trauma in terms of her black identity, but not in terms of being a woman or being a sibling or whatever. So I don't think the Dramatica elements at the bottom level, pursue, prevent, avoid, consider, reconsider, so forth, are the actual parts in internal family systems. I think those are the roles that the parts take on in certain scenarios. I think that's a clearer way of understanding it, a more accurate way of understanding it. I think you have, so in essence, I think you have various parts, and I'm still unclear as to how identity, what generates identity for you. I guess maybe it's purely experiences. I don't know. What determines what parts you have? I'd love to explore that further. But I think the mind, the parts within the mind, then take on certain roles. So remember, I was talking about internal family systems, and that members of the family, or in this case, the internal mental family, take on certain roles. Like if there's a void of a role, not, a void role, a certain role that's not occupied by a part, a part will instinctively fall into that part and start embodying that role. I think those are the roles. I don't think those are the parts. I think a part then assigns itself to that role. And that's what happens in Dramatica instinctively. When the mind is creating a story, the mind is actually using these algorithms. And that's why you need software in Dramatica to be able to calculate the stuff that's very subconscious. Those algorithms, some of those algorithms you can do in your head consciously, but some of them are so subconscious that they're more like instincts, and it just takes way more effort to try to figure out those parts when they're instinctive anyway. It's easy to use the software just to calculate it. So so I think, so that's what your mind is actually doing. Your mind is coming up with a character like Luke Skywalker and a villain like the Emperor and a character like Darth Vader. What it's actually doing is subconsciously, I think, taking the pursue character, the pursue role, should be more specific in my terminology, pursuit role, and assigning Luke Skywalker to that. And that's only for the objective story domain, as opposed to the main character and impact character and subjective story through lines. And then the Emperor as the reconsider and the avoid or prevent role. There's that character would be assigned to that role. So I think that's how to fuse these two, IFS and Dramatica, together. I think so. Going back to that hypothetical woman analogy, I think it's like these are separate films. I think a film about her being of African descent is one movie. Another movie is her being a sports enthusiast would be another movie, and so forth and so on, a sibling and so forth. Those are separate movies because when you're watching a film, you have a main character. You could have a black character being in sports, in a sports film. You can have a black character being in a movie about African descent. They're totally different movies. So I think they're different scenarios, or each scenario being a different movie. So I think certain scenarios bring out pursue, prevent, avoid, or whatever in different ways than other scenarios or other movies do. So I hope that covers everything. Oh, I wanted to bring in, I want to bring in the rest of what I talked about here. The racial trauma would be attached to one of the parts of his mind. This trauma would have played out like a film. Which of the four domains of Dramatica would this be connected to? It's easy to think of the main character domain as the I, since this is the personal quarter of the film. I think actually I'll have to figure out how the domains or the through lines factor into this model I'm developing. Here, what about legitimate cases of identity or body dysphoria? Now, I say legitimate cases because I think there's some that there's the trendy aspect of trans and identity politics and sexual orientation, so forth. There's definitely a trendy aspect to it, and there's a peer pressure aspect and so forth. So when I say legitimate, I'm trying to separate it from cases that may involve other causes. So I see two possible reasons in here for identity dysphoria and body dysphoria. It seems from people explaining themselves there are legitimate cases of body dysphoria and identity, sexual identity dysphoria. Buck Angel comes to mind. Blair White comes to mind. And they themselves say that I am a biologically born this way, and my body's been modified so that I can deal with this dysmorphia. And they said that they feel, or at least in the case of Buck Angel, he said that he feels calmer, he feels more in tune with himself this way. Presently, I suspect that there are two possible causes. One is a trauma resulting in distorted understanding of male and female. That bothers me quite a bit. It gives me dismay. When when people hype up certain aspects of being a male, what is being a male? What is it to be female? And they add in all these aspects, like a female has to be subservient and feminine and wear dresses all the time and so forth. What about what about girls who feel like tomboys, or even women who feel like tomboys, or they don't necessarily dress like women, what women are supposed to dress like? They are still women. I presume that they, in all aspects, they identify as female. They identify, they do other things. They know that they are women, and the same way with the men who don't play sports. They're not rugged. They're not macho. Whatever, but they are still. They're not effeminate. For the most part, they're not effeminate. They're not gay. They're not. They're not identifying as women. They just simply. They don't match these rigid stereotypes. They're not macho, they're not rugged, they're not manly men, so to speak. But they still identify as men, and that's it. So I'm trying to understand what's actually in the mind, how the mind functions. So what is the male version of tomboy, I wonder? Anyway, and maybe that says something about society and the way our society perceives things. But so I think that part of the cause is that some people had been indoctrinated into these stereotypes, and if they think that if I don't fit the stereotype, then I must be really internally of the opposite gender, and that's a distortion in and of itself, which leads to other distortions and so forth, a false sense of identity, a false sense of themselves. Then the other thing, I think, is more biological. I think perhaps there is some aspect of the brain that controls sexual identity, like sexual orientation, meaning your attraction to women or your attraction to men, or both. I don't know about attraction to both, like pansexual or something, or bisexual. People would just use bisexual. Pansexual seems relatively new. I think it is relatively new. I'm still on the fence, no pun intended, but I'm still on the fence whether bisexual actually exists physically, biologically, as chemical part of the brain. I know from personal experience, when I was watching, here's like personal story, when I was very young as I can recall, I remember identifying with men on TV, since TV was a big part of my life. I felt a kinship, this is more accurate, I felt a kinship with the men, and I felt like an attraction to the softness and femininity of the female characters I would see. So then later on, maybe around puberty, I don't know, but those the attractions I had toward watching the physical aspects of the female body were there in me, and I knew them. So I presume that if you lay aside that population, that group within that subpopulation of the larger population that have distorted views of masculinity and femininity, put them aside. I think some of them, in that case, some of these others, in that case, the second group, would have felt an opposite one to the experience I had, where they felt an attraction towards the men, like a physical attraction towards the men, and not so much the women. Um, so I'm open to that. I mean, if I felt it towards women, I imagine there are some who were boys who felt this towards men or males and so forth. So I'm open I'm on the fence when it comes to that. Bisexual is a little bit harder to I'm not as much persuaded by the bisexual, especially pansexual part. Um, so anyway, I think that concludes what I wanted to say. I've talked quite a bit. I'll just finish this off. All right, so this reiterates what I just explained. Presently, I suspect that there are two possible causes. One is a trauma resulting in distorted understanding of male and female. The other may be a result of a biological malfunction of the instincts towards sense of identity and sexual instinct. Oh, I forgot to mention something. So I was talking about sexual orientation. I think there may be a separate part of the mind/brain. So I'm trying to link them. I'm trying to understand how the brain is generating the mind. The mind is a perception of what's going on in the brain. It's my definition of it. There's sexual orientation, and then there's sexual identity. Sexual identity would be how you see yourself. Like that goes back to the tomboy aspect, and that's where rigid stereotypes really screw things up. Like I'll go back to the tomboy. Well, I'll go back to the tomboy and the male equivalent of it, whatever that is. If you're a girl, because usually these things start, at a young age, often these start at a young age. When you're indoctrinated into rigid stereotypes about what a female should be or what's feminine, and you don't fit that, then you would think that you're supposed to be in a different body. That would be a distortion of sexual identity. You identify as either male or female. And then in terms of men or boys, and has nothing to do with orientation. You're attracted to a certain sex that's different from what you identify as. Or I don't want to say identify as, because that's the term that's thrown around, what you feel instinctively. I like the term instinct. So in terms of boys, if you are indoctrinated into this sense that maleness is equivalent to ruggedness and He-Man and John Wayne and so forth, and smoking and whatever, it's like toxic masculinity, and that's a whole other aspect. But it ties in. This is where it ties in. You have a distorted view of not only two things, of identity, sexual identity, and sexual orientation. Like your own sense of sexual identity may be distorted, and then other people would then think, well, you're supposed to be oriented this way, and then that's where gay comes in, that's where lesbian comes in, that's where bisexual comes in. It becomes a mess. So I think there are two aspects in the mind. One is sexual identity, the other is sexual orientation, and it's fascinating. There are two developers of Dramatica, one of whom underwent a sex change with hormones and so forth, and that's what helped her to develop this model of Dramatica, because the Dramatica accounts for the mindset of the writer writing it, and that mindset goes into the whole movie. Like, okay, a man writes a story. This is according to the her take and how Dramatica developed, the theory developed. A man writes a story and has probably a linear way of tackling problems, and a female writer would have a holistic way of solving problems. So if you have a man writing a story, or writing a film, I'll just say film, writing a film, and with no outside interaction, this is presuming a producer isn't coming in and changing things around. That film would embody a mindset and a way of dealing with things from the male way. That doesn't mean fist fights and so forth. I mean just a linear way of tackling problems. And so it's like it has an identity of its own, and you can the hallmarks of a male way of tackling problems. And a female going in and doing it has a female way of tackling problems. It's interesting that The Matrix was written by two brothers, who then later underwent sex change operations. And it's interesting when somebody did an analysis, applied the software to calculate all these different aspects of the movie, The Matrix. The main character, played by Keanu Reeves, a male actor, the character, not just the main character, but all the other characters, the whole story twisted in such a way as to tell you this was written with a holistic way of resolving problems. It's interesting that these two men then wrote this, produced, created The Matrix, and then later on underwent sex change operations. It's like as if, to me, it's like saying internally they were thinking in holistic terms. Maybe perhaps that's just my take. And there's another movie, Alien, and of course the sequel, Aliens, but I'm not going to talk about that. In the original Alien, from what I've read, Ripley was written to be a man, and then they cast Sigourney Weaver, and of course she can't play a man, so they just changed it. She's a woman named Ripley, but they probably would not have thought to change her internally. They simply cast a woman, but they probably didn't think that would also involve changing how the main character dealt with dealing with problems. And then not only, you can't just change the main character, because you have to adjust all the rest of the story to fit a female perspective, a female way of solving problems, because that seriously shifts the order of the sequences of the themes. It's interesting that's how Jim Hall, this enthusiast of Dramatica, discovered this thing about The Matrix. In every group of every unit of 4 sequences that the Dramatica program predicted, it had its final 2 of the 4 flipped. It's not matching what you're seeing in the movie itself. And then when he corrected for that, if he said, oh, okay, now let me change it from a linear way of dealing with things to a holistic way of things, he recalculated the whole sequential order. The themes flipped and just aligned with the movie itself. So that's what they would have had to have done. Of course, Dramatica didn't exist when Alien came out, but they took a male story with a male mindset, and they cast a woman in the lead part. Now, of course, women would say, "Oh, yay! We got a great, strong female character as a protagonist." But the protagonist is really a man. A woman was cast in the part. So, anyway, I can't remember what, but I was listening to a Dramatica podcast. You can listen to on iTunes, where they were analyzing. I can't remember what the story was, but it was written. It was a movie based on a novel, and the novel had been written quite a few decades before by a woman, and they found that all the characters seemed to interact with each other. Both the men and the women seemed to interact with each other as women would do, like a holistic way of dealing with issues, concerns. And I remember a comment by somebody in that podcast. It was a discussion in the podcast, and during that discussion, one of them said, well, that would have been before this understanding of the differences between how men think and how women think was really understood. So anyway, I want to share all that. It's quite a bit, and I'll stop and talk to you next time. All right, so long.